All right. Peace, and blessings. Welcome to our conversation tonight with Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, LBS, Baltimore's grassroots think tank, to talk about the 2020 election reflections and moving forward. All right. Sorry. There was some background noise. But anyway, so my glass had a bit of a reflection. But anyway, so we're going to talk tonight about the 2020 election. And before we get into the actual substance of the conversation, first I want to introduce you to me. My name is Adam Jackson. If you don't know me, I am Smart Black Man on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. But I also have the distinguished honor of being the Chief Executive Officer for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle here in the great city of Baltimore in Maryland in the United States. And the purpose of our organization is to focus on grassroots political advocacy for the Black community. And so if you are unfamiliar with LBS, if you are not sure about who we are, we've been around since 2010. We've actually celebrated our 10-year anniversary this year in August. And we're going to continue to do advocacy at the local and state level for laws and legislation that benefit our community. And actually, the reason why we wanted to come here and talk about this tonight is that so much of the national conversation has impact on what we do in this country at the local level. And it doesn't just apply to Baltimore. It applies to a variety of organizations, institutions, and political advocacy efforts that Black people are doing. And there's been so much conversation and commentary that you kind of drown in all the noise. You know, you've been watching CNN. I know you have. You've been watching CNN, MSNBC, Fox. Have you been watching every news station talking about the election, giving their little fresh hot takes? And you need a grassroots political perspective that is going to color how you carry yourself through this after this election, after the inauguration is complete. And what I know I have found many different sources of information that I don't trust all the time. And I've seen lots of conversations about it that aren't really based in reality. And so tonight we're going to have a special treat. Mr. Lawrence Grand Prix from LBS, he's our director of research. He's going to give you a thorough conversation and presentation about what the 2020 election is and is not, and to talk about break down some of the myths, some of the other conversations that people are having on the corporate and progressive mainstream, and to break it down so to see how it's relevant to you as a Black person, and to really reflect on what's been happening during this election, and to talk about the way forward for our community. And so I think you're gonna have to be locked in. Like if you watch, you're the 147 people watch this on Facebook or Periscope or Twitter, you're gonna have to be locked in. Lawrence did not come to play with you. You hear me? You need to sit down. You need to make sure you take notes. You need to make sure that you're paying attention. This is not one of those fly-by-night, soundbite situations. I know it's Thursday night, but it's cold. It's a pandemic. You ain't got nowhere to go. So make sure you stay locked in for the entire conversation. We're going to make sure that we take your comments online, but make sure you stay through, because if you have questions, if you have any kind of input to the conversation, we want to hear it, because the input that you have is going to directly implicate a lot of the work that we're doing here in Baltimore. So before we get into the conversation, and because we're going to begin in a couple seconds, giving a couple more people more time to hop on. Like I mentioned, LBS is a grassroots political think tank located here in Baltimore City. And so the reason that we're able to do so much political work in this city is because we are directly supported by Black people and other folks in community who support our work. And they donate and give resources to our community, to our organization on the monthly basis. And so if you are one of those people that has suffered from fatigue from this election, if you're tired of having the same conversations, if you want to support a Black institution that is working passionately on behalf of your community, then I highly suggest you become an LBS sustainer. You go to www.lbsbaltimore.com/sustain. You can give $10 to $15 a month. That's less than what you pay for Netflix, what you pay for coffee in a week. You can do that right now. The link is in the left corner. I know you see it. Come on, don't play it. Don't play. It's there. So go ahead and sign up while you're listening to the stream, and all your money supports the work that we're doing like this in Baltimore. All right. So let me bring my good brother, Mr. Lawrence Grand Prix, on the screen again. He's our director of research for LBS. And like I said, he did not come to play with you. What's up, Lawrence? What's up, brother? How you feeling, man?
Hey, how you doing? I'm good. Happy to be here.
Cool. So, Lawrence, I know you got information to share. I didn't take up too much time anyway, so I'm going to just bring you in to get us started. Folks, again, make sure you go into the chat. I can see all the comments. So no matter what your question, what your input, what your feedback is, we want to hear it. So make sure you stay lit in that chat box. I'll bring up your comments on screen. Anything that you want to ask by the end, make sure you stay locked in. All right, I'm gonna get up out of here, Lawrence. I'm gonna hand it to you.
Thank you. Okay, so just a little bit of background. So as some of you may know, we come from the world of policy debate, which is a competitive activity where you take different political ideas and test them out in these competitions around the country. A big part of that activity and a part of the way that I chose to compete in it was to use analysis of polling, analysis of elections as part of my debate argument. So I've been looking at election polls, did the math. I've been looking at election polls and prognosticating national elections since 2002. And back then, this was nerd stuff. No one was really into this. But come 2012, Nate Silver, the Obama re-election, this stuff started to come into the mainstream. And basically, with social media, everybody became an elections pundit, elections predictor, and trying to interpret elections. And I'm not a math person. I'm going to say that a bunch of times tonight, but my just experience with this material led me to believe that I think we've been coming to some false conclusions. And I just wanted to maybe use my analysis to reset the narrative, to complicate the narrative. Some of it may go against what you intuitively think is right, but I've done the best that I could with the time I have and the skills I have. And I really hope that this material is useful, because some of the narratives being circulated around how to interpret this election, I think are really dangerous, and I think require a grassroots research approach to begin to intervene in some of those dynamics. So Adam, is the screen share up? I'm ready to go to the PowerPoint now. Are we good on the PowerPoint screen share, Adam?
Hey, sorry, Lawrence, can you hear me?
Yeah. I was just wondering if the PowerPoint showing on the screen for the viewers.
We're good to go. Yep.
All right, just making sure. Great. So this is my interpretation: election 2020 myth versus reality. Of course, we have Joe Biden with the black voters, the myth, and Joe Biden with John McCain as the reality. And I see 2020 as the ink blot test of elections. So some of you might know this as a Rorschach test. This was used by psychiatrists, and I believe still may be in some schools of psychiatry. But the idea is this is just an abstract form, and you can tell a lot of the person's desires and personality by what they see in this abstract ink blot. So some people would see a beautiful butterfly. And if you go back to the ink blot, looking at it, some people, instead of a butterfly, might see the angel of death. And I feel like that's a lot of what's happening with this election. Some people are seeing the absolute best version of the picture. We beat Trump. Black people showed up. Everything's great. Some people are seeing the opposite. Black men didn't show up. We didn't win back the House. Everything's terrible. And this election can kind of be difficult to interpret. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of complex things going on. And this is trying to deal with some of this Rorschach-ification, if you will, of the 2020 election. So this is going to be a math alert. I've been mulling over this data for the past week or so, and I basically have gone from this to this. I am fully baked. My brain has been melted. There's a lot of stuff in this data that has challenged my preconceived notions of what I thought was going to happen. And I know this is going to be intimidating for some folks, because we have a lot of folks who have math anxiety. I would consider myself one of those folks. I'm not going to vouch that all my math is perfect. I will promise you that nothing in this presentation will be higher than 10th grade math, because I swear to you, that's the last time I had a math class. So in college, I took the astronomy class, and I kind of finessed that math class like everybody else. So I'm going to work as hard as possible, but I could not do this presentation without basic arithmetic, because a lot of what people are getting wrong is based upon incorrect arithmetic and projections. So the hope is, like this beautiful young lady in the picture, that we can trust ourselves, trust the math, and trust the combination of our common sense and the math to actually paint a picture of what's going on here. Few disclaimers. Elections are big and complex. This is a nationwide election, 340 million people in America. Polling has not been processed and votes are still being counted. So this is an incomplete data set. I actually went to college with the person from the New York Times who does their elections polling. So some of what I do is just osmosis, being on the debate team with him. And I think he wrote an article that said anybody that's trying to do an autopsy and get a cause of death for the 2020 election, that's like the coroner showing up and trying to do a cause of death while the body is still bleeding out on the ground. It's just too early because we don't have all the data we want, but we need to use what we have to be able to check some of the preconceived notions being invested in these election results. So third, our communal desires have to stand up to empirical interrogation and scrutiny. Again, there's a lot of people who want to project what they want to be true into these election results. Our job is to see what is true. And finally, we can't hit everything, but we will make space for conversation. This is about my recognition and honest frustration with the lack of space for contrasting narratives in the mainstream media. We are a lot of things. We are definitely not the mainstream media. We have our own space. We have our own analysis, and we're going to do what we can do to present what we think is useful about this election. So this talk is going to be debunking 4 myths, I believe, that are being circulated about this election. And the goal is to present a grassroots analysis based upon that myth busting. So with that said, myth number 1, the hood showed up for Biden. This is a take that I'm seeing all over the country. This is a news article that's very representative of that work. There's a lot of people doing really good work to get out the vote, but people are claiming that this is some sort of clear proof that not just Black folk voted, but specifically urban, middle-class, working-class cities showed up to vote. And turnout is high in this election, but this particular notion that the hood saw the Biden campaign and responded to it, it's just not true. So the reality is that it appears that Black, poor, and working-class Democratic Party turnout did not substantially increase over 2016. I will add that if you account for overall turnout increasing, Black working-class turnout did not increase higher than the overall turnout. But in a lot of cases, and this is what blew my mind, in some cases, it didn't increase. Everyone thinks that Trump had to have increased turnout. And even though we're still counting votes, my projections say that just might not be true. So, again, a little bit of math. Don't get too freaked out. We have a total for 2016 votes, 138 million, approximately. We do not have a total for the 2020 election, but we have a range, 157 to 165 million. So we need to know how much turnout increased as a percentage of 2016 turnout to get a baseline to understand if there was some magical turning out of the hood that just blew past all projections and all other demographics, like some people are saying. Basic math, looks like turnout's going to be about 10 to 15% higher. The math says 16% based upon my projection. So we're looking at a nationwide 16% increase in turnout, and a lot of people are saying that the hood exceeded that. Like working class, poor Black neighborhoods exceeded that, and that's why Biden won. And that's why we got to look at the data. So this is the election map of Wisconsin in 2016. This is Milwaukee County, where the city of Milwaukee is. Hillary Clinton got 288,000 votes. If we are to believe the analysis that the hood turned out in places like Milwaukee, and that's why she won, we should see about another, according to the math, roughly 45,000 people more should have voted in 2020 compared to 2016, just to get the turnout increase to a baseline of what people are saying happened. So remember, the 2016 number is 288,000. Here is the data for 2020, 317. So that number should be like 330. If the narrative that we were told is true, it's actually true. In fact, it should be higher than 330 if that was this massive turnout of the hood for Joe Biden. So that's one example of, again, we saw a turnout increase, but it's just not this massive hood wave of working class black and brown people that we expected. It gets even more interesting when we look at Philadelphia. So again, 2016 data. Remember, Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016, came down to Philadelphia County. 2016, Hillary Clinton got 584,000 votes in Philadelphia County. So again, if there is this massive organizing campaign, if the hood was just so turned up to say, forget Trump, we should see turnout be about 75,000 votes more than what we saw in 2016, just to get to that baseline, like I said, of about 15% increase in turnout nationwide. 2020 turnout results, again, they are still technically counting votes in Philadelphia County, but as of right now, there basically is no increase in turnout at all. So remember the last number was like 588. This number is 576. There's going to be more provisionals coming in. There's going to be more mail-in ballots from military folks overseas. It ain't going to be 100,000 of them in Philadelphia County. Turnout is not going to massively increase in Philadelphia County in 2020 from 2016. That is deeply counterintuitive. That is the exact opposite of everything everybody is saying, but that's what the data show. And our job is to look at the data and to figure out why this might be happening and to see if there are other places that reflect this trend. And so I got curious. I got curious about the results in Baltimore because I saw the protest. We were part of the folks organizing some of the protests, or at least helping some of the youth organizers and trying to do what we could. We saw the wave. We saw the anti-Trump. Had to increase turnout, right? So let's take a look. 2016, Clinton, Kane, Baltimore City, from the website, 208,000 votes for the Democrats in Baltimore City in 2016. They're still counting votes in 2020. But as of right now, Baltimore's turnout in 2020 for Biden and Harris is about 10,000 votes below that. Counterintuitive. Totally against everything that we're told to think about politics. But the data is staring you right in the face. And I think that's an answer to what's happening here. And my job is to use the data and use my understanding of politics to begin to interrogate what that answer could be. But before that, let's go to myth number 2. And this is, some folks may have saw the thing I posted on Facebook about this. This is one of the things that really got me into believing we need to do this analysis, because this is a very popular narrative around the 2020 elections that Black men just didn't show up for Joe Biden. So you may have seen this chart. This is from what we call exit polls. So you can't exactly just like get data en masse of who voted for who and what their demographics are. You have to like call them and email them and text them. So people have gotten hundreds of thousands of people to respond to these exit polls. And what they found was that of the people who voted, and that's a critical part, you got to remember, exit polls are only the people who voted. This is not the entire Black population. It's not even all Black registered voters. These are only people who showed up to vote in 2020. But of those people who showed up to vote, about 8% of Black women voted for Trump, but 18% of Black men voted for Trump. And there were lots of hot takes and pieces saying this is some sort of huge issue of Black men embracing Trump that needs to be dealt with. So I looked into the data, and this is what I realized. That the reality is that the gender gap is a statistical illusion. This gender gap can be almost entirely explained by felon disenfranchisement and premature deaths among Black men. So this idea that there is these hordes of Black men who are just seething to vote for Trump, you have to understand what's actually happening. And when you look at it, it just doesn't hold to the scrutiny. So about 3 to 4, again, the number is flexible. The number has decreased over the past 8 years, because some states have re-enfranchised voters. But about 3 to 4 Black men literally can't vote. Of course, in many states, and elections are done statewide, every state has different laws. If you are convicted of certain felonies, they take away your right to vote. And while some Black women are impacted by this disenfranchisement, it's about 80 to 90% of people impacted by this are indeed men. And when you think about mass incarceration, New Jim Crow, this adds up to millions and millions of Black men who literally cannot vote. So they cannot be part of those exit polls because they're excluded because they can't vote. And this is the part that's really important. Many people don't understand this, but Black men have higher mortality than Black women. Part of it's homicide. Part of it is bad health. Part of it is bad health care. Part of it's poverty. But there are 1.5 missing Black men. So of prime age, which ironically is also prime voting age, there are 1.5 less Black men than Black women. So that thing people talk about like where are the men, that's real. It's not that they're all in jail. A big chunk of them are unfortunately just dead because of the higher cumulative rates of mortality, especially among poor Black men. That's the important part. The incarcerated Black men and unfortunately the deceased Black men are disproportionately poor Black men. And here is the map of the places where the percentage of Black adults, if it's 43% Black men, that means that, because when you have kids, it's random. So 50% should be male, 50% should be female. So in any adult population, it should be about 50-50. But there are huge swaths of the country where it's not 50-50, not 50% male, 50% female. It's like 10% more Black women than Black men. And that's the missing man effect in terms of the cumulative mortality combined with mass incarceration. So look at it. Swing states like Georgia, swing states like Florida, Baltimore is very, very disproportionate in terms of that reality, which makes sense given what we know about health, what we know about murder rates in Baltimore. Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, all represented in this missing Black men phenomenon. So again, these people literally can't vote because they're either in jail or some of them are not alive anymore, unfortunately. This is the final piece of the puzzle, and this is the part that I think nobody talk about. When you make more money, you tend to vote Republican more, no matter what race you are. So this is a statistical map of the party registration in terms of percentage Republican, dependent upon the income bracket that you're in. So the higher the income, the more likely you are to be Republican, even in the most highest percentage Black states. So it's amazing. I've seen very little people disaggregate Black voting data by class. I think that is a very anti-intersectional approach to understanding this data because it's just simple reality. Richer people tend to vote more Republican. And combined all together, that explains the illusion that people saw in those exit polls. So look at this. This is a hastily put together infographic that I did. This is increasing income. So this is as you go up the income scale. Poor people, really of every race, every color, tend to vote Democratic more. We have this illusion of the racist, poor white person. That's not quite borne out in the data in terms of voting. They might be racist, but they vote Democrat more. So male and female, when it comes to Black votes, at the lower levels, they tend to be more Democrat. But as you go up the income scale, you get a little bit more red and a little bit more red. So what you can call that is purple shift. That's the term that I had for it. There's this purple shift that as you go up the income brackets, you get more red, kind of slid in with the blue, and you're making it more purplish. And that goes all the way up to the highest income brackets. And it's a little bit more men in the higher income brackets because of wage inequality. That's only at the high end. So you have these men who are making a lot of money, and they're voting more towards the Republicans because that's what Black men and Black women do when they make more money. Not by huge numbers, not like 50, 60% Republican, but like 10, 20% as opposed to like 5% in the poor Black demographics. And again, this is not a perfect infographic, but this is what's happening in those exit polls. You do not have enough poor Black men who are able in going to the polls to vote to balance out that small percentage of richer Black men who tend to vote more Republican. With the women, you do because they're not disenfranchised and they live longer. So when you have rich Black women, bougie Black women, for lack of a better word, voting Republican, there are more poor Black women to balance that out. So you have a lower overall percentage of Black women voting Republican. For Black men, that cannot happen because they are either locked up with the gavel, the criminal justice system, and that graphic didn't come out great, but that's the graveyard. They're dead. And when you put those two together, that explains that illusion of the gender gap in terms of Black men. So show your work. I'm going to do a little math. It's not too complicated. I just want you to understand statistically what's happening here. These are not perfect stats. They're close, but they're not perfect. I just want to show you the statistical phenomenon and explain to you as clearly as I can what I think is happening here. So it's really about 40 million Black votes, but let's just round it to 30 because this is a little bit easier. And frankly, I didn't have time to fix this. So let's just say 30 million Black votes. Some are not registered, some are not old enough to vote. Let's take a round number of 20 million Black votes. So we're working with 20 million Black voters in this theoretical eyeballed rounded set of voters. You still with me? Good. 10 million Black female voters, and around 10% are GOP. So that's what we saw in the exit poll. About 10% of Black women voted for Trump. So that'd be about 1 million Black female voters. And that all makes sense? That's what people are saying are good. That's a fine, acceptable amount of GOP votes. Now, whether we owe the Democrats our votes, whether this is representative of anything that's like nefarious or like betraying Black women is an entirely separate debate. I just want to focus on the math. So when people stare at the infographic, when they stare at the headline, they assume there are 10 million Black voters and they're voting for Trump at double the rate of Black women. That's the assumption. So when they see 18% of Black men voted for Trump, they assume that's 1,800,000 Black male GOP votes. That's the assumption. But remember, you are not accounting for the fact that there are less Black men in the voting pool overall because of incarceration and premature death. There are not 10 million Black male votes. Again, in this hypothetical number that I'm giving you to represent the Black male vote. So let's just remember we saw that infographic. Let's just say 4 million are disenfranchised. Let's just say 800,000 are dead prematurely because of the higher rates of mortality, because of homicide, suicide, poor health, poverty, things like that. That's 4.8 million potential votes gone. That's just wiped out of the voting pool. So that in and of itself changes the math in terms of that crazy percentage of what it looked like Black men voting for Trump actually was. That leaves you with, again, 10 minus 4.8, 5.2 million Black men in the voting pool. So let's do the math. And you take the same number of Black male votes for Trump as Black women, but you divide it by 5.2 million, not 10 million, to reflect the fact that less Black men in the voting pool because of disenfranchisement and premature deaths. What does that give you? 1 million divided by 5.2, 19%. That's the gender gap. That's what happened. Those are the only Black men who can come out to vote because of these dynamics. And that's not even counting for that purple shift I told you about. I didn't have time to do that in my math. So those rich, more affluent Black men who are voting at a little bit higher rates for GOP, that's not even counting for the idea that a few more Black men might vote Republican than rich Black women. I think it's entirely possible. But the pure mathematics of Black male incarceration and deaths are just not accounted for at all when you see that statistic on the screen and people are assuming there's this widespread revolt of Black men because a few very vocal men in the minority are making a bunch of noise about we don't like the Democrats, we like Trump. So last thing I want to say is that Black women actually turn out at sometimes double the rate of Black men. So if Black women come out at double the rate of Black men, even if you have Black men voting for Trump at a higher rate, because there are more overall votes for Black women, there might be just as many Black women voting for Trump as there were Black men voting for Trump, because Black men come out at lower rates. Does that mean all these Black women have been brainwashed by patriarchy? I don't know. What I do know is that the mathematics that people are using to produce that narrative is just not good math. It doesn't reflect the reality of the demographics. It doesn't reflect the reality of, quite frankly, Black male suffering and Black male incarceration and deaths in America. And we're literally blaming Black men for not voting for Biden because they're literally dead. And we're obscuring the systemic violence that kills Black men in a rush to blame them for not voting for Joe Biden. So that's one of the most important reasons I wanted to do this talk today, just so we could fundamentally check out the data to check back against some of these hot take narratives that oftentimes just don't take that statistical reality into account. So I know that was a lot, but we only have 2 more myths remaining, and then we'll be open for Q&A. So the third myth is that Black votes equal Black leverage. Fine, Lawrence, I get what you're saying. The Black blue wave Maybe it didn't quite turn out the way we thought it would, but we still voted a lot. We still had a lot of votes, and there were key Black votes in key states. So the myth is that because Black votes were critical in key states, Biden owes Black voters, so we can expect policy to favor us. If only this were true. The reality, and this is again part of what we have to prepare for, is that Democrats bank votes from the Black left, but they run and they govern to the white center. Dems would rather run to the suburbs than run towards working class Black folk. As long as they believe they just need to appeal to white suburbanites, they won't take up our issues because they think our issues risk alienating white suburbanites. And I'm not going to go back to those Wisconsin maps and those Pennsylvania maps, but if you actually do the turnout analysis on those maps, the suburbs turned out at a massively increased percentage compared to the actual inner city. So they're looking at that data and they're saying, why would I run on issues for poor working class Black people when I can just run on, I'm going to be respectable, I'm going to wear a mask, I'm going to make you feel good, which is all I need to win white and many Black and brown suburbanites. The suburbs are increasingly multiracial. And part of my argument is that, yes, more Black and brown people in the suburbs probably voted this year. But the poor and working class people in the urban core, it does not look like they turned out. And that's a reflection of the way that the campaigns were run that we have to understand, analyze, and frankly push back against. So to understand what I fear is happening, the narratives that are being produced, and what this means for us in terms of implications, you got to understand a little bit about the expectations for 2020. This is the reason why there's so much analysis and hot takes going on, is that many people expected 2020 to be a bloodbath for the Republicans. They expected to annihilate Trump, win the Senate, and just annihilate the Republicans in the House. So this is what the Democrats thought they were going to do. I think they had like 228 seats in the House of Representatives before this election. They expected on average to win about 10 seats because the polling looked so good. COVID was happening. The economy was supposed to be tanking. People hated Trump with the debate. They expected to annihilate Trump and the Republicans in the House. This is the coattails theory of politics. So you see this long, tuxedo jacket. This is a term they use in politics. So when you have a person who you expect to win the presidency, more people vote for president and care about president than anything else. The idea is because they're voting for you for president, they're going to vote for your party for everything else. So if they vote for Biden, they're going to vote for Cal Cunningham in North Carolina. They're going to vote for Ossoff in Georgia. They're going to vote in all these House races and Senate races, Democrat, all down the line. And so it's basically like a big, strong person with a big, giant coat on. And you can just literally sit on that long coattail and let their strength just carry you along without even having to use your legs to walk. So that's when you hear political coattails, that's what people talk about. They talk about a popular person at the top of the ticket elevating everyone else below them on the ticket, like for representative, for Senate, and you winning more Senate and House representative seats because you had a powerful, charismatic vote getter at the top of the ticket for like president or governor, because this works at state level as well. People saw this was going to happen. They saw it was a shoo-in. But if we go back just one more time to the New York Times data set, it says right now that the Republicans actually are going to gain 6 seats in this election. This is a catastrophe. They thought they were going to gain 10, and they lost 6. So, and this is a lot of data. This is that Rorschach test I told you about. But a toss-up district is one where you basically, it's a coin toss. That's why they call it toss-up. You expect these to go 50% blue, 50% red. They won every toss-up. Republicans won every single toss-up on this map. Now, all of them are counted, but it looks like they're just going to dominate. These are supposed to be 50-50 elections. Look at these races where the Democrats were expected to narrowly win. These are Democrat-leaning seats. Republican, 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 Republican in the lead. Republican, Republican, Republican. It's just the Democrats are going to hold on to the House. So they have enough seats in the House, so they're still in majority. Nancy Pelosi is still Speaker of the House. But the fact that they lost so many seats when they expected to win so many seats has been devastating for the morale of the Democrats in the House, and they're basically pointing fingers, they are sharpening knives, and they are trying to explain how this happened. So when you ask the question, why did this happen? Here's what the Democratic Party leadership says happened. The Democrats blame the underperformance in the House to GOP scaring voters with the extreme agenda they felt Black, young, poor, and working class voters were calling for. Excuse that typo. So this is Jim Clyburn, the Black South Carolina Democrat who basically delivered South Carolina to Joe Biden in the primary. The South Carolina primary is the reason Joe Biden won. It is the most conservative Democratic primary in the country, which is why they placed it in the strategically important date of February, right before a bunch of really big primaries like Texas and California happened. Remember, Joe Biden won South Carolina, then Buttigieg and Klobuchar dropped out of the race. That allowed Biden to kind of consolidate the juice to beat Bernie. So this is a very, very powerful man, Jim Clyburn, a Black Democrat. And what does he say cost Democrats these seats? Defund the police. That's his answer to why the Democrats underperformed when turnout across the nation went up 15%. Remember, Democrats for years have been saying, if we just got people to vote, Republicans are a minority party. If we just got turnout to increase, we would destroy the Republicans. Turnout increased massively. The Republicans kicked their butt in the House. This is really, really scary. And Democrats respond to that fear with their reflex. Centrist Democrats do what's called punching left. I know it's going to look weird because I think it's flipped for the screen. But if you see someone to the left of you politically, you say, why are you so radical? Why are you so scary? You're costing me votes. Stop doing that. And this is another reason I'm doing this talk. It's because this narrative is floating around. And it is, the Democrats are deeply, deeply angry at basically anyone to the left of Michael Bloomberg at this point. So I just want you to hear, it's the only video on the whole talk. Hopefully the tech holds up. I want you to hear how angry this Democrat is. This is a centrist Democrat from Virginia who is on what she thinks is a private conference call to the Democratic caucus, giving her interpretation of what happened. I guess, 2 weeks ago? Losing track of time. But here's the video.
Fixation on elite cultural obsessions like Russiagate, but instead, Bernie, AOC, and the grassroots left would be blamed. As one example, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, a former CIA officer and member of the corporatist Blue Dog Caucus, tore into leftists on a caucus call. Take a listen.
We need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again. Because while people think it doesn't matter, it does matter. And we lost good members because of that. And my background, I know you all know it, coming from CIA, the first thing you do is always do an after action. And you dig into everything you did right and everything you did wrong. And if we are classifying Tuesday as a success from a congressional standpoint, these will get torn apart in 2022. And excuse the profanity, that's the reality. And I would hope that moving forward, we will not just work to hold the majority, but we will actually work to communicate to the American people that our policies are what is good.
Okay, so besides the obvious fact that this is a literal CIA former operative talking about why socialism is bad. If you know anything about the CIA's history of Latin America, you'd be skeptical. It's not surprising that she would be against socialism. But just the anger and the rancor that is in her voice, I wanted you to hear that, because all the people saying that we can push Biden left, that we can push the party left, this is the party. This is what they think of you pushing them left. They're literally saying, F that. You cost me seats. You cost me good people who I liked, and I'm never going to forgive you, basically. So this argument is wrong. And I just wanted to put it out there. Not surprising. It could be easy just to say, oh, she's just a spook. She's just a CIA person. But let's actually look at the data. This is one of those exit polls we talked about. So this is 100,000 voters around the entire country aggregated on critical questions about what was one of the 5 most important issues for how you voted. Only 11% said crime and safety. So this whole defund the police thing, only 11% said that. It's just not what people voted on. They voted on the economy. Racial inequality, that 20%, it's about the 20% that's like, Black and Latino and Democrat. So it makes sense that they would say that. Coronavirus and healthcare policy, but it's really the economy that drove the GOP votes. Democrats won 30% of the people who said crime and safety was the critical factor in their vote. So this is a lot of text, but I just want you to understand this is what Clyburn is talking about. He gave one example for why defund the police cost them Democrats the election. And it was Cunningham, his friend, Joe Cunningham in South Carolina. I just want you to understand just how ridiculous this argument is. Joe Cunningham is in a district that Trump carried by 13 points in 2016. So the fact that he won in 2018 was because Trump wasn't on the ballot. It wasn't about defund police. He won it by 13 points. So the very idea is this was like some actual tossed-up district. It wasn't. It's a huge Trump district. Trump was on the ballot. That's why the GOP won. But it's even worse than that. This is an area that's rapidly growing in South Carolina. And apparently, a lot of these people who are coming from out of state are even more GOP leaning than the people who were there before. So all of these new imports over the past 2-4 years are making the district more red than even what John Clyburn is used to. So maybe he's thinking about this district 20 years ago. He's been there for like 30 years. But it's becoming more and more red, and it's gerrymandered to exclude large majority Black areas. So the fact that he's using this as some proof that defund the police cost Democrats the election, it's ridiculous. But people are hearing that. People are sharing that, and I've seen conversation after conversation based upon Clyburn's quotes. Oh, what are we going to do? Is the slogan good? Are people too scared? He has one example, and it's a crappy example. And this is what happens when you don't actually interrogate the data and think through the argument a little bit more deeply. And the reality is that the reason the Democrats did not win down ballot is because this whole campaign was not about down ballot. This entire campaign was about Donald Trump. Vote against Donald Trump. Another exit poll. Do you vote for the candidate on the issues? Trump wins on the issues. Do you vote for the candidate on personal qualities? Biden destroys Trump on personal qualities. The entire campaign was about Biden's personal qualities and Trump's personal qualities. So if I vote against Trump, then why would I vote for Democrats down ballot? Trump's not running down ballot. This was the entire Democratic campaign, because when you run on personality, you don't have to promise people anything on the issues, which is what Democrats want to do. And here's just one really, really clear example of that. John Kasich, some of you might know, is the former Republican governor of Ohio. When he was governor of Ohio, John Kasich cut funding to deal with infant mortality in Black neighborhoods in Ohio. Not only did he cut funding to prevent infant mortality in Black areas of Ohio, he then blamed Black mothers for their children dying. He said, quote, the issue of infant mortality is a tough one. We have taken that one tough area to take on as the minority community. And the community itself is going to have a better partnership with all of us to begin to solve that problem with infant mortality, because we're making gains in majority communities. This is genocide, the language. White people are fine. What's wrong with Black people? They can't keep their kids alive. All of the history of inequality in the healthcare system, all of the history of systemic poverty, the history of racism impacting people epigenetically, all of these things are completely irrelevant to John Kasich, who literally said, yeah, your babies are dying, Black community. You should work on that. After he cut the funding for the entities that were working on infant mortality. That is politically something that's very, very bad and should be thought of as such, and not surprising for a Republican. So what did John Kasich do? John Kasich got a prime speaking spot at Joe Biden's Democratic National Convention, where the party nominated him for president. He is sold as a moderate anti-Trump Republican, and this is the new Democratic Party that can bring in the quote-unquote moderates like John Kasich. And Biden literally says that he's open to a Republican running mate. And he's really talking about Kasich when he says that. So if you're a Black voter And this is the Democratic Party that's telling you. Are you really going to trust them down ballot? You might hate Trump. Trump is evil. I think we all agree with that. But this is a party that's literally opening the door for people like Kasich who completely adopted ideologies that are fundamentally anathema to your people living. Again, these are poor, working class Black people. These are the folks impacted by disproportionate infant mortality. It's not that there isn't a problem of Black infant mortality in the suburbs, because racism is real, but it's centered in poor and Black working class communities. And then they say, hey, I might vote against Trump, but I don't like it. I don't trust it. And if this is where Democrats are going, I don't want to go there. Shockingly enough, that theory is totally backed by the data. So this is a chart. I know it's hard to read, but it basically accommodates for different congressional districts and what their lean is. So districts might lean heavily towards the Democrats or heavily towards the Republicans. And you basically look at, what is the candidate's ideological score? So are they more conservative, going this way? Or are they more liberal, going this way? So what it found was, when you accommodate for the natural ideological lean in the districts, that's the important thing. The more conservative you are, the worse you perform. This is our friend, the CIA agent Steinberger right here. She almost lost. And the folks running on Medicare for all, the folks running on different, more progressive issues, relative to that district lean, they actually performed pretty well. So it was the centrists who performed poorly, because if you're going to give me people like John Kasich, how about I just vote Republican? You're not giving me any reason to vote Democrat, while the people on the left actually are. They are saying things like, I will fight to defund the police. They are saying things like, I will fight to give you Medicare for all. So they're actually performing decently well. And so, yeah, don't be confused by the red. These are Democrats overperforming in naturally red districts. And these are Democrats that tend to be more liberal. And again, my theory is that people showed up to vote for Joe Biden. And when you give them a BS corporate former CIA agent down ballot, they say, who was that? I'm not voting for them. But if you actually have someone who's promising them stuff, they're going to say, oh, I like that person. They want to give me more health care, and I'll vote for them. This is not my interpretation. This is also reflected by the data. And that's the important thing. We can have theories, but we want to have data backing up the theories so we can actually produce political conclusions and solutions. So I know we're running out of time, but I want to try to wrap up here. We got a few more things to cover. Why don't Dems just run to the left? If we have the data that says they do better when they actually produce people who actually run on stuff, why don't they run on stuff? It's because the Dems need to run to the center to keep their donor base happy. Most of the people who are politicos, political junkies like me, know this happened in 2019. But for those who might not be, I want you to understand this is what Joe Biden ran on. In June 2019, Joe Biden had a big money fundraiser with a bunch of big money donors. And his entire argument to them was literally, Joe Biden to rich donors, nothing would fundamentally change if he's elected. So he's trying to sell folks, look, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not one of those Democrats. For the rich people, I need you. And he actually goes on to say, I know the text is, again, it's kind of not easy to read. But he says, I mean, we may not want to demonize anybody who has made money. Truth of the matter is, you all know in your gut what has to be done. We can disagree on the margins, but the truth of the matter is, it's all within our warehouse. No one has to be punished. No one's standard of living will change. Nothing will fundamentally change. If I win the nomination, I won't let you down. I promise. To a room full of the wealthiest people in New York. This is Joe Biden. This is what the Democratic Party runs on. And so they'll give you respectability. They'll give you competence, quote unquote, down ballot. But they won't give you Medicare for all, because these are the people who are funding their campaigns. So as much as we think of 2020 as this political explosion, I want you to rethink of 2020 as the Joe Biden campaign of 2020 specifically. It was not about politics. It was literally anti-politics. His entire campaign was, you don't have to worry about crazy politics anymore. I'm calm and rational. You can relax. This is the quote. You won't have to worry about my tweets when I'm president. If he was tweeting about Medicare for all, the people in his fundraiser would have to worry about his tweets. So that is a sign of what his inclination will be politically And some of you will, of course, seen this famous sign from the Women's March. If Hillary was president, we'd be at brunch now. And that's exactly the liberal sentiment, which is Hillary was a centrist Democrat, would have continued the policies of systemic racism for the most part. She may have had some reforms. She may not be that great. But the whole point is that this huge influx of attention to the corporate media has been about wanting to feel safe so you can go back to your regular life. It's not about changing the material conditions of oppression. So this huge influx of suburban voters, you don't need to give them policy. You have to make them feel safe. What Joe Biden does, just by being Joe Biden. And they're not going to risk suburban white people for a radical campaign to give poor Black and brown people policy concessions when they think, and the data may back this up, I won without you. I won with the white people in the suburbs and the Black and brown people in the suburbs. And what they want is to go back to brunch. They want calm, centrist policy. And if you do that radical leftist stuff, I'm blaming you. It's not true. But this is what they believe, and that's what matters. So yeah. Before we get to our last myth, this is a talk by Naim Akbar. I'm not going to play it, but look it up if you want to, because it really struck me thinking about this election. We don't understand how politics works. Because for African people, when you give someone a gift, they're culturally and spiritually obligated to reciprocate in some way. That's an African cultural exchange of what they call a gift economy. So everyone saying we have leverage is really using an African-centered way of thinking about the world, which of course we totally support. So we deserve leverage. But the reality is in politics, deserve has nothing to do with it. One of Naim Akbar, who is a psychology professor at Florida State, well-known African-centered psychologist, he says you cannot expect European people of European cultural lineage and cultural thought systems, be they Black, brown, or white, if they have these traditional Eurocentric thought systems, you cannot expect them to act like African people operating in an African thought system. In an African-centered communal system, when you give someone that sort of meaningful gift, they are obligated to reciprocate, or else they are risking social repercussions. The political world is not governed by African-centered thought and cultural systems. It is governed by power, money, and fear. So we might feel in our hearts that because we voted for Joe Biden, we deserve reparations. I saw that meme all over the internet. We deserve reciprocity. Politics does not work that way, even if we work that way. And if we want to understand politics, we cannot expect politics to work like us. We cannot expect Nancy Pelosi to work like even the Black politicians we know at a local level, because they're dealing with billions of dollars of money, power, and levels of extraction that do not fit within the moral calculus of the world that we think should be. Or maybe it's the moral calculus of the world we live in. That's not the political world of the Democratic Party, unfortunately. So finally, I know we're running a little bit long. We do have a lot of material to get through, but this is the last myth. And this is another myth that's just so prominent that people will say, yeah, I get everything you're saying. It's not perfect, but we got to do it. Because if we use presidential politics, we can juice up support for local politics. People get so jazzed up. Politics is pop culture now. Politics is sport now. Red team versus blue team. And if we do it at a national level, it may not be perfect. We may not get them concessions, but we can get people registered. We can get them gassed up, and they'll go to the governor's race. They'll go to the mayor's race. They'll go to the local city council's race, and we'll get better results for politics. I don't think that is reflecting reality. I think that an overfocus on the federal level might make people less focused on local politics. And the important thing is that this argument works the other way around. It's only when you build trust at a local level and build with people beyond every 4 years, presidential elections, that you can produce national electoral victories with data supporting this theory. So when you have this national politics, it encourages a candidate-centered campaign, not a district, that should be or people-centered campaign. So when you think of, this is just, I encourage you to look this up because this blew my mind. When you think of the mothership, you think of George Clinton, you think of Black folks, you think of the funk, you think of this great experience of Black culture. But in politics, this is the mothership. This is the mothership consulting firm. Because when people think about elections, they think about people door knocking, people from the church ancillary, people from the union hall scrambling. That's not how the National Democratic Party runs elections. We got to get that myth out of our mind, because Democratic Party elections are run with money and media and consultants. And these are the people who run your national elections. These are the people who run your senators. These are the people who run your presidential campaigns. The dog in the picture is actually named after a character on The West Wing. So this is their fantasy camp of political theory that's all centered on campaign ads. It's all centered on slick marketing, or not so slick marketing, but marketing that makes them a lot of money. It makes a lot of people a lot of money and does not require you to commit to anything politically, policy-wise, to win these elections. That's what they don't want to do, as we've talked about. They want to give you a message that gets you to vote without promising you anything so they're held accountable after they win. So have you ever got an email that looks like this, that's like all caps, and it tries to scare you into telling you that Donald Trump is going to do something crazy unless you give us money right now? That's mothership. That's these folks. That's their magical policy innovation in campaigning. It's literally produce emails that scare the hell out of you to help you give them more money. And Mothership pulled in about $150 million in the 2018 cycle. This is the Democratic Party in terms of who's actually running most, and that's the critical thing, most of the elections. They're basically scaring wine mobs in the suburbs, and nothing against wine mobs, or just old boomers who are terrified about Trump, to give them money, because these folks take a cut all the way down. The graphic designer gets a cut. The person at the local TV station gets a cut. The person who's doing the online ads gets a cut. Everybody eats, and they tell people this is how you win elections. Even though, as you may have figured out, it's not how you really win elections. And here's some data. Here's an example. North Carolina. North Carolina had a very competitive Senate race. A guy named Cal Cunningham was a Democrat centrist, almost won, didn't win, had a sexting scandal. That really hurt him. But I don't want to focus just on the scandal, because people thought he was going to win despite that scandal. I want to focus on the media strategy they used and the quote-unquote organizing strategy they used compared to Georgia, which is where we're going to end this talk with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, as you may have figured out. Screen Strategies Media got $25 million from the Cal Cunningham Senate campaign in one quarter to run digital online ads. This is their website. I know it's a crappy screenshot, but the actual website is just crappy. It looks like something an 11th grader did in HTML. This is a multi-million-dollar digital strategy operation, and this is their website. But that's not the craziest thing. This is their Facebook page. They have no icon on their Facebook page. This is a 9-figure online digital political strategy firm whose last Facebook post was in 2019, and I believe they have 4 Facebook friends. This is what we call a hustle. This is the type of work where if an intern did this for LBS, we would fire the intern, even though they were working for free. This is a 9-figure digital strategy firm. So we can't get into this all the way now. We're probably going to have a whole talk on this. When we say the Democratic Party is full of hustlers, I don't know these folks. Maybe they're super great, and this Facebook page was just happened to be crappy. This is like a hustle to me. And given what happened in North Carolina, I think it's reflected in the results. So let's just go to the results. North Carolina results. So look at this. Look at all these places. This is from 2016 to 2020. If it shifted left or shifted blue, more Democrats showed up. If it shifted red, more Republicans showed up. So look where the blue shift was. Raleigh-Durham, the Research Triangle, where the universities are, big city, Charlotte. Again, look at those suburbs. Look at those suburbs around Charlotte. Look at those suburbs around Raleigh. Big left shifts. What's this stuff up here? What's this stuff that's all red and all Republicans? Got to be white rednecks, right? No, it's not white rednecks. These are black communities. Highest share of black residents, North Carolina, 40% or more. These northeastern counties that are deeply black and agricultural had some of the highest red shifts in the entire election in 2020. Now, again, that does not mean that a ton of black people showed up and voted Republican. That just means compared to 2016, more black people voted Republican than last time. And how do you explain that? I think the answer is simple. When you put money into big media buys, when you put money into centrist candidates, who you're trying to get are these super online, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram people in cities and suburbs, black, brown, and white, more middle class, more stable. When you're not running on material politics, when you're not talking to people face to face, when you're not building beyond every 4 years, poor working class people or just black people are going to say, hey, you're not talking to me. The only person you talked about was Trump. Cal Cunningham is not running against Trump. He's running against a Republican. I don't see a difference between the two. They might have left the ballot blank. This doesn't necessarily mean they even voted Republican. They may have just left the ballot blank. They didn't know who Cal Cunningham was. And with black people, it's like, if I don't know him, I'm not voting for him. I'm not putting my name next to somebody I don't know. I'm not risking my credibility. So this is the cost of not actually talking to people on the ground. And I know North Carolina does have the Moral Mondays and the on-the-ground organizing, but the data shows that they were focused on judicial challenges to the right to vote, as opposed to explaining people why they should vote in the first place, what they actually get out of politics. So good things happen in North Carolina. They flipped some Republican Senate seats. This is not a knock on the Moral Mondays movement of Dr. Reverend Harry Barber. It's just the data. It's the reality. And this is when you compare that to a place like, so one last thing, because it's going to be critical to the conclusion. Poor minorities vote less. This is not a controversial fact. This is just reality. And again, poor white people don't vote that much often. And again, we don't talk about that. But they just vote less. This is not easy data to find. We don't like to talk about class and race when it comes to voting. It's really stunning to me, but it's the reality. But, and this is data from 2010 in Ohio, so this is not the best data, but it's what I can find on short notice. So poor minorities vote less, but when you contact them consistently, low-income people, they have the highest increase of probability of voting. So the point is that this is where the real gains can be made. When it comes to winning elections, the real gold mine is not the suburbs. The gold mine is taking these low probability, low income voters, contacting them consistently, and turning them into high income voters. Because what this says is that if you contact low income voters enough, they turn into high income voters in terms of their likelihood of voting. This, again, is counterintuitive. We're taught that poor people are too stupid to care about politics. This is a lie. This is classist and also racist propaganda that makes you think that only high-income people are smart enough to understand the voting. So people say, why are you wasting that money on them poor people? They don't care. It's not true. It's not what the data says. And we have a huge example to prove it. The Georgia election. This is, of course, Stacey Abrams, longtime politician in Georgia, was in the state assembly, but she had a strategy of doing grassroots organizing. She started in 2012, so 10 years ago. She started a broad-based canvassing and voter registration strategy against the wishes of the mainstream Democratic Party, because they said, what you wasting money on poor people for? Why are you going into rural Georgia counties to vote? They don't care. And this is the language that they're using. We spend a lot of time trying to convince atheists to be Catholics rather than just convincing Baptists to go to church. For many people who don't vote, they don't vote because they don't see what's in it for them. So instead of just telling people that your ancestors voted, you got to vote, you're actually talking to people to explain to them what their material interest is in voting. Other texts talked about them focusing on things like college access, and Georgia had a great scholarship program. So they're protecting things like that at a state and local level. That's what they were doing in 2012, 2014, 2016, driving up voter turnout for 2018, where Stacey Abrams almost won the governor's race in 2018, really got the race stolen from her by a Republican Secretary of State, who was the person who does the election in Georgia, basically stole the election. In 2020, all that work at a local level, talking about things like the Hope Scholarship, led to the state flipping blue for Biden 2 weeks ago. So again, look at that shift. Let's look at the results. It's in the data. How do you do that? How do you go from 5 points Trump to 2 points Biden? That's a huge shift. These other states like Wisconsin barely shifted at all. It went from 0.2 to Trump to 0.2 Biden. Pennsylvania, 0.3 Trump to like 0.2 Biden. Georgia, 5 points Trump to 0.2 Biden. Massive shift. And same demographic map we had from North Carolina, a lot of the people from the suburbs wanted. Just look at this. Look at this blue shift. This is insane. But the critical thing I want you to focus on is not Atlanta, because Atlanta is a big multiracial suburbs. A lot of northern folks coming to Atlanta who vote like they're still in New York. Folks coming for tech jobs. It's down here, down south near Alabama. This is the exact sort of places that went red in North Carolina. They are also going blue in Georgia. And so you see more black, more Biden. Less black, less Biden. And again, what we saw in North Carolina was the exact opposite. Again, in North Carolina, they were still going for Biden, but they were shifting more towards Trump because they had a media-centric outreach strategy for a centrist candidate. In Georgia, because again, critical fact, Trump also won North Carolina for the presidential election as well. So it wasn't just down ballot race for Cal Cunningham. Trump won North Carolina for the presidential election as well. And in Georgia, as opposed to these rural, small, southern places going more red, which they kind of did all over the country, which is, again, counterintuitive, they went more blue. And that's why they were able to hold on and win Georgia. So, conclusions. And thank you for sticking with me so far. I know it's been a lot of data. We must develop a more nuanced and data-driven relationship to politics. Our emotions can lead us to support narratives which we feel show the Black community in a positive light, or express our own frustration and rage, but aren't supported by facts. Second, we cannot expect political systems we do not control to operate by the same rules we live by as Black people. Again, we cannot expect Democratic Party to act in a reciprocal manner to what we do for them, for what they do for us. It is our leverage, it is our power that gets us the justice that we deserve. Unfortunately, not our morality and not the gift of our vote that we give to them. It's us being able to leverage our vote to make them fear that if we don't vote, they won't get what they want. So, and this is the last thing, and this is just, I think, the critical distinction that I'm trying to make, is that this cathartic argument about how Black voters save democracy actually works against the leverage we have. The Democrats ran the Nothing Will Fundamentally Change mothership campaign. If our argument is you ran that campaign and we voted for you, then they're going to run that campaign again. If we want them to run a different campaign, we have to show to them, like that graph said, the biggest gains they can get are investing in grassroots outreach to poor and working class voters, really of all races, but especially Black and brown folks. Because if the Dems ever want to balance out the hordes of GOP voters who voted for Trump in astounding numbers, again, everyone thought this was going to be a blowout. That's what the poll said. But millions of people voted for Trump, and I don't think they're going anywhere. So if you want to balance out those voters, you need to invest in independent Black institutions of credibility to turn out the people who would vote Dem but don't vote. Poor working class Black men and women. That's what Stacey Abrams did by focusing on local issues, like I said, like that Hope Scholarship, like those Atlanta social justice issues, and that accumulated in a presidential victory in Georgia where almost nobody thought that presidential victory was possible. So we need to not invest in the white corporate consulting class. We need to not run these centrist milquetoast candidates. We need to invest in poor working class institutions, because only they have the credibility to get people to turn up when you contact them. You're not going to show them a slick Facebook ad and get them to show up. Their personal pride and credibility is at stake. They've seen politics do many things for them that don't really reflect their vision of humanity and fairness. They don't trust you. So you got to give money to the people who they trust and not give $150 million to people who name their dogs after characters from the West Wing. So, yeah. I know that was a lot. I know that got there basically on time, basically an hour. I hope people found that interesting, and I look forward to any questions that anybody might have.
Well, first off, Lawrence, I told him you did not come to play. That's what I tried to tell him. They stayed. So I had 100 folks watching, and if you stayed, I told you to take notes. Lawrence doesn't come to play with y'all. First off, thank you, Lawrence. And if you just hopped on the stream, if you didn't catch the intro to this presentation tonight, you just finished watching the 2020 election, Reflections and Moving Forward. And that was Mr. Lawrence Grand Prix, our Director of Research for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, Baltimore's grassroots think tank. And yo, I mean, funny seeing all those things condensed into one place really captures a lot of the things I think people have been thinking about. And there's lots of conversation, lots of comments actually that came up that I think you couldn't see during your presentation, but I'm actually going to go back through and make sure we catch them. But before we get into that, first off, shout out to Zakia Jabbar, longtime LBS supporter, on for the whole stream tonight. Appreciate you, sis. Miss Donna, thank you if you signed up tonight to be a sustainer, appreciate you. Ganesha, saw you signed up to be a sustainer tonight, appreciate you, sis. We had lots of folks hopping on. Andy Ellis, my man. Yeah, man. So let's get into these questions. So first off, I saw it up here near the top. Let's make sure we can get into these questions. First question. Why do you think Democrats did so poorly with Black voters and voters overall?
Well, let's be very specific about which Black voters they did poorly with. They did poorly with, they did well with suburban voters in general. Black voters in general who are poor and working class just turn out less. And like I said, the cities where I showed you at the beginning, they didn't turn out because why would they? They turned out for Obama a little bit more because it was a Black president. But when you're running on the Wall Street, nothing will fundamentally change platform, they say, man, it's all a sideshow. What's in it for me? I'm struggling to live. I got coronavirus and I got one check, but it doesn't seem like anybody's really running on, this is crazy, the economy's all messed up, we got to fundamentally change it so stuff can be better. They're running on, I'm going to make it feel normal again. And normal is like 2012. Normal is, respectable politics and bipartisan consensus. It's not really changing the economic conditions to make poor working class Black people show up. So like I said, turnout was up all over the country. And like I said, the suburbs are multiracial. These are not the suburbs of the 60s and 70s. A lot of suburban people showed up. A lot of youth showed up. Biden did excellent amongst the youth, and youth turnout was high. But it looks to me like it was Black Generation X especially. If you look at the age crosstabs on the data, Black Generation X was the most likely to vote for Biden. I think that's the crime bill. You got to consider that that's the generation that really got impacted. They knew Biden as the architect of the crime bill. They saw what mass incarceration did to their homeboys and homegirls. And they said, again, this is probably in my mind, working class and poor Black Generation X. I just see this political regime and I don't think it's working for me. A lot of Black people also live in states that are not competitive for the presidential election. So if you're in Maryland, you may feel like your vote doesn't count. If you're in New York, you may feel like your vote doesn't count and you don't show up, and that ends up impacting the race for the House of Representatives, or the race for the Senate. So again, we do not have all the data. Like I said, this is like calling the coroner while the body's still bleeding out and say, give me the cause of death. But if I had to guess, it's just, look at the campaign ads. Look at what Biden said. The data says that if you actually give people a substantive agenda that gives them hope that things will improve, they'll respond to it. That definitely wasn't the campaign at the top level. The top level campaign was Orange Man bad, Biden's a good dude, let's go back to how things were in 2016. For a lot of people, 2016 was also not very good. So it's just one of those things where people make the decision that I'm going to show you that I'm not just going to take anything you shove in my face. I have some self-respect and autonomy, and I'm not going to vote down ballot. And what happens, some people, and this is, again, when you put John Kasich at the DNC, you're basically saying moderate, quote unquote, respectable Republicans are good. Republicans who don't call you the N-word are fine. So why is it surprising when people vote for Biden because Trump is crazy and then vote Republican down ticket because you told me Republicans were fine? I believe in balanced government. I believe in bipartisanship. I want someone to check Biden because I don't want Biden to just wow out. So I think you're going to see a lot of people who split their tickets, Biden at the top, and either didn't vote down ballot or voted Republican down ballot because they said, hey, you told me Republicans were fine. I want to check Biden, or I want to show you a protest vote that says I'm not going to take centrist Democratic Party BS no more.
God, appreciate that, Lawrence. We actually have another question from Miss Conyers. The question is, where is the income data, specifically poorer Democrats that vote across ethnicities?
You got to look at the 2016 exit polls. So we don't have that data for 2020 yet because it's just too close. So if you look at the 2016 exit polls, you can kind of see some of the economic crosstabs. What I did was there are some exit polls who kind of did that. The NBC exit polls actually did some economic analysis. Again, my biggest takeaway from doing this research is that the people who are studying this in the media don't seem to be serious about thinking about the intersection of race and class in terms of how we aggregate data. It's kind of like this woke assumption that if you're black, you're just black, and we're just going to lump you all into one box. Or we'll do the gender stuff to kind of like play the genders against each other. We won't actually look at the distinct economic interest of black and brown people in different classes. Like, there are a lot of working class Latinos who voted Trump because they saw Trump give them a stimulus check and Trump's name was on it. And they say, hey, he's talking about stopping illegal immigration. I'm legal. So I don't like illegal immigration because they compete with me for jobs. And people are saying, oh, that's messed up. You are racist against your own people. But people aren't understanding. First of all, Latinos are very diverse. Some of them are from Mexico. Some of them are from a country like the Dominican Republic, which is like 3,000 miles away. And just the assumption they're all going to have unified interest is kind of silly. Black people, there's more genetic diversity in Africa than there is between any other parts of the world. Just genetic difference within Africa, cultural difference within Africa. Because of slavery, black folks were united by oppression, but we all have distinct cultures, distinct interests, distinct experiences. We're not a monolith. And so the data isn't very good. I wish I had more. I can look up some books to give you, but I think it's just a reality of our media class is not comfortable talking about material interest of black and brown voters. There's this assumption that black and brown people are emotional, that they are imbued by the legacy of the civil rights movement, that they owe Democrats their votes. And people aren't actually taking the idea of like black strategic voting or black voting across economic interests. They aren't studying it seriously. So the biggest takeaway I have is that we need to study our own community, do our own research, and understand these dynamics for ourselves, because we're not going to depend on mainstream media or mainstream academy to take up that analysis because they don't seem to be doing it very well.
Got you. Next question. We have one from my good brother, Anthony Day. Based on y'all's analysis of Biden's policies, what do you think he'll do in his first 100 days as president?
That's a good question. That may be a whole separate talk. But it's going to be a lot of executive orders because there are two critical Senate races in Atlanta. Because Georgia has a rule that you have to get 50% of the vote to win the election. So the Republicans won the two Senate races in Georgia, but they didn't get over 50%. So they go to what's called a runoff. So they take out the third-party Libertarian candidate or the Green Party candidate, and they redo the election between the top two vote getters, Democrat and Republican. So there are going to be two critical elections in Georgia the first week of January. If Democrats win both elections, Democrats control all three branches of government. So they would get a 50-50 tie in the House, and because Biden won, Kamala Harris would be the tiebreaker in the Senate because that's what the VP does. So if the Democrats win Georgia, which is possible given what I talked about with Stacey Abrams, there could be a big stimulus bill. But if the Republicans hold the Senate, the Republicans are going to go back to their 2010 fiscal discipline, austerity, don't spend no money, obstruct everything politics. And it's going to be really hard to do anything Congress-wise. Either way, the Democrats' majority is going to be razor slim in the Senate and slimmer in the House because they lost seats. So it's going to be a lot of what's called executive orders. The executive branch is obviously the presidential branch. Places like the EPA, like the Department of Treasury, the DEA, the drug agency, they have power, even if Congress doesn't act, to make real big changes in American politics. So Biden could deschedule marijuana. He could make marijuana no longer a Schedule I drug. He could forgive student loan debt. He could tell the Department of Education, the Treasury, to just write off certain amounts of debt for all the people who have that debt. He could do that, but I don't know if he's going to do it in the first 100 days because Biden's entire 50-year political career is about bipartisan consensus. He is a centrist to his bones. He even talked about having a Republican as his VP. I didn't make that up. It's like that is who he is in his heart. He's going to try to get the Republicans on board. So he's going to push to the center, at least in terms of his rhetoric, for a while. He may end up doing something to make it look like he's caring about the Bernie left and like the black people who voted for him. But it's going to be symbolic. It's going to be a lot of symbolic executive orders, like, renaming the Confederate military bases or things like that give you a good media cycle, give you some hits on Twitter, but don't really shift material policy. That's what I fear is going to happen in the first 100 days. But we have to wait and see, because the Senate is still up for grabs, and Biden is he's being pulled in a bunch of different directions. So he's a centrist at heart, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to deliver something to the left, and we have to see what happens with that.
Appreciate that, Lawrence. We have another question from Ms. Jill Warzer from YouTube. The question is, do poor and working class people of all races need to work together to move the agenda left?
That's a good question. It's a complicated question because as much as I didn't talk about it, you can't really understand this election without understanding anti-blackness and the role racism does play in the electorate in general. So Biden is as centrist of a candidate as could be run, and he was still painted with this whiff of socialism and radical black rioters, because people just have this deep psychological fear because of American history. American history is Native American raids and slave revolts. And that gets grafted onto the riots of the 60s that people are still psychologically scarred by. And the very limited property damage we saw this summer triggers people's anxieties in ways that, even though it wasn't the number one thing people voted on, when people say, I care about fiscal discipline, what many scholars say they're really saying is that I'm afraid that black and brown people are going to get too much free stuff from the government and get too much power and take over my life. So this Trumpian wave, part of it is Trump is more of a populist than other politicians. And people saw the checks come out. They saw him say he doesn't like China stealing all our jobs, which no Republican really says. And they want someone to give them something material. But there is a question of race that precludes a lot of interracial working class dynamics. So it really just has to be a mutual agreement where, most of the people who are talking about radical redistribution of wealth, they're not talking about this radical cultural project of canceling you every time you say a wrong word on Twitter. I don't really care about that. I've never cared about that. I've always subscribed to the Stokely Carmichael theory of, if you want to call me the N-word, that's your problem. If you have the power to treat me like an N-word, that's my problem. And so this whole fear of cultural disagreements amongst the working class, a lot of it's overblown by a media class that loves to use these cultural artifacts to get clicks on their website and retweets, but doesn't actually want to talk about power, doesn't want to talk about the tech class who dominates the Democratic Party, doesn't want to talk about the Wall Street finance class who dominates the Democratic Party, and how we need to just redistribute that wealth so that we all have the opportunity to live the lives we want to live. So if we're talking about cultural autonomy for different cultures of people, along with investment in working class communities that makes you feel like you don't have to move to a big city, just to get a job and live. Like a lot of white people feel like their cities are dying. Like working class is dying and their whole way of life is being destroyed and no one's caring about them. I think you need to invest in rural white communities because they deserve to have a quality of life too. Just because someone doesn't agree with you or has some negative ideas doesn't mean that they deserve to suffer immiseration and be addicted to heroin and Percocet. But also it's just good politics. We are not going to get concessions for working class black and brown people if there isn't concessions for working class white people in that policy agenda as well. I'm just very adamant about my focus on working class black and brown people, and working class white people have more than enough ability to advocate for themselves, but we should definitely be listening to them, listening to what they want politically, and if our interests align, we can work together. And it's just all a question of being strategic and having interest convergence to push back against the common enemy, which is the very small but increasingly multiracial set of people at the top trying to keep the status quo the way it is, radically redistributing wealth and power upward towards the elite and towards the rich. So we definitely need to talk about how to have that alliance. It's going to look different than how it did in the past. It may not be a big workers' union uniting the black and brown working class because, union power has been decimated. So we need different formations to push our agendas. I'm just focusing on the ones we have to build as black people. that serve Black people, that are from Black people, funded by Black people, and for Black people. And then when it comes to federal policy, you have to first build your base, then establish the coalition. So often we're taught to do it the other way around because people just get antsy at the thought of building independent Black power for Black people. But Stacey Abrams, I think, is kind of an example of that. Stacey Abrams is complicated. It's not as easy and clear cut, but it's just one small example of a larger trajectory, which is build your base, then address the coalition, which is what I think we need to do. And when that moment comes to address the white working class coalition, I want to be in that position from a position of strengths, not from a position of necessity and weakness.
Dope answer, Lawrence. So if you're still watching right now, we're talking about the 2020 election reflections and moving forward. We're going to get to a few more questions, but I first got to give a shout out to all of our sustainers on here. I seen a few of y'all commenting in the comments saying you sustainers are proud of it. Got to give a shout out to Nadira Smith. Nadira, I mean, if you don't know that, Nadira been on the squad for like 6 years. So that's my sister right there. Nadira, appreciate you again. Always. Zakia, 3 years she been in the sustainer. You need to sign up. Zakia has been on deck for 3 years. We've been mutually supporting each other through our work. Go support Racial Justice Now. But again, people in community who we work with on a daily basis that are dope Black folks support LBS. Dr. Boyer Freeman, thank you. Appreciate your compliment to Lawrence for his presentation, and thank you for being a sustainer. Dr. Freeman, Dr. Billy Robert Spann, thank you for being a sustainer. Again, when people say they are a sustainer for LBS, they are directly financially supporting the grassroots political advocacy of our organization. So the presentation you saw tonight is funded by the people. It's not we're not waiting on foundations and a bunch of other white mainstream institutions to support the work that we're talking about here tonight. This is real work, people. And so this isn't free. You know what I mean? Free is cool when you have money, you're independently wealthy, but that's not any of us here. So if you want to support LBS, lbsbaltimore.com/sustain. Appreciate y'all. So let's get back to the questions we got here for tonight. So I think Ms. Phyllis Dawes has a question about the new administration with the new mayor, Brandon Scott. What is LBS's role with his administration and just in local politics? More of a broader question about LBS and how we're relating to the political landscape here.
I think that our role is to do organizing and to reflect the interests of different constituencies that maybe don't always have a constituency representing them, that reflects the true desires of the working class Black and brown people. So whether it be the work we're doing with the Youth Fund or the things that we're doing statewide to get the cannabis legalization is very likely to pass this year because the state of Maryland's hungry for a new source of revenue. But given the nature of the war on drugs, it would be a travesty to allow white people to become millionaires selling cannabis after Black and brown people have gone to jail for that. So we're focusing on not just the economic opportunities selling cannabis, but also the tax revenue being redistributed to communities most impacted by the war on drugs as a form of reparation for the war on drugs. So those are the type of issues that I think reflect us building a working class Black and brown constituency that has real pragmatic ability to solve problems. I was on the radio today talking about the spy plane. If you want to deal with murder, do reparations for the war on drugs. We won't need a spy plane. But there isn't a constituency saying that, but there is a constituency for the spy plane. And I think that our relationship with Brandon reflects that reality, that we've worked with him many times over the years, but it reflects the same dynamic that we use our skills as researchers and community organizers to build power and consensus amongst our base. And then we use that consensus and power to leverage concessions that actually impact the lives of Black and brown people in a very real material way. Just look at the people who got grants from the Youth Fund in terms of the process that Daniel Terrain and you, Adam, and Davon, and other folks at Youth Fund have been able to really put money on the ground. And that work's just going to continue with Brandon. I mean, we got to see what his agenda is and kind of where his focus is in terms of his political trajectory. And I think we're looking forward to seeing that new administration roll out in December because it's just more opportunity to do what we do.
Yep. So we got also missed a couple people. Miss Donna Brown says she signed up to be a sustainer. Appreciate you, Miss Donna. And we also got my man Rich Rivera, also a sustainer with LBS. And I think I got somebody else. Who else I miss here? Wait. I think I'm up. Oh, yep. I think I don't have your real name, Drake K on Periscope, but appreciate you for wanting to be a sustainer. Appreciate the support. There you go, Miss Caroline. Thank you for being a sustainer for LBS. Thank you so much. So Rich, my man, Rich, if you're listening, my bad. I know I was supposed to email you back. Charge it to my head. Don't charge it to my heart, my brother. I got you. I'm gonna hit you back. But my man, Rich, he has a question. I always like to get your thoughts on the importance of economics and making change in our communities. You mentioned how money runs our elections. Do you think this needs to change for us to succeed in implementing more progressive policies?
Absolutely. I mean, so people think sometimes it's not as simple as people think it is. It's not like people put a briefcase of money in front of you and you bow down before them. It's more about, what is your social network? Who are the people you know who can get you a job, get your kids a job? Who are the people who you owe favors to get where you got to? So it's this social milieu, this pipeline of people who all have interests that you have to recognize when you govern. So one of the big things that people talk about is, why don't we have Medicare for all in America? Every other industrial nation has this medical system that's not for profit. It's kind of crazy to think just for being born, you have to pay money every time you get sick until you die and make someone else a profit just by your suffering. When you say it like that, it's kind of weird. But the Democratic Party, all those mothership people, all of those Democratic Party pipelines, the lawyers, the Democratic Party is basically run by lawyers. Like, look up any Democratic elected official, they're probably a lawyer. Who do they represent in their private practice? People like the insurance companies. And so there's just an incestuous pipeline between consulting for the health insurance companies, doing legal work for the health insurance companies, doing lobbying for the health insurance companies, and then becoming a lawmaker. So how can you bite the hand that feeds you and become a lawmaker? And after they put a briefcase of money on your table that says, if you want to get elected, you got to serve my interest. It's just literally like the water you swim in, the air you breathe. You can't imagine what would happen to you, the precarity of your life, if you cut yourself off from that economic and social network. So we need to not just have our own politicians that we fund, which we need to do. We need to develop institutional pipelines of leadership and pipelines of support so that people can come up in a progressive Black ecosystem where they can get college scholarships, where they can get academic fellowships. Is there a single endowed chair, university chair at a university that's paid for by a Black person who is progressive? White people got hundreds of economics professors whose whole life mission is to think up ways to cut the federal budget. And you can make a good living going to conferences, getting fellowships to do papers, working for conservatives to figure out how to cut Medicaid and how to cut stuff Black people need. But how do Black people develop small business agendas that actually don't give money to people who just want to be Black millionaires, people who want to get rich in the hood and move to the suburbs? How do you build a policy agenda that can actually invest in working class Black and brown people in mass and have them circulate money amongst each other? I don't quite know the answer to that. But what I know is we need the institutions that can pay people to think up the answer for that. And then we need to fund whatever that answer is. And that's what we make a condition for our political support. So we got to study, we say all the time, study what the right wing is doing. The right wing is dominated by a radical fringe philosophy of economic austerity and radical anti-regulation. Most Americans don't like it. Most Americans don't agree with it, but it's not just the money they have. It's the infrastructure they have. It's the, thousands of people go to college on scholarships, like grad school, get their law school paid for because they're willing to spit that conservative economic doctrine. We just don't have an equivalent for Black people. Definitely not Black people who are trying to be progressive and radical. So we got to think deeper than just about funding politicians to give us business opportunities with these bills, because that's more transactional. If you want to be transformative, you have to invest in the infrastructure so that young Black and brown people can come up through a Black radical ecosystem, be accountable to that ecosystem, and plug their work back into strengthening that ecosystem. Because that's really what the right wing has, and that's why the right wing, with a philosophy that almost no one agrees with, has been able to be so dominant and so powerful in American life.
All right, all right. I couldn't forget my brother Richard Rowe. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, brother. I'll always forget. I always forget that people are supportive of our organization and how long they've been around. Richard, appreciate you, brother. That's all I can say to you. And my good brother George Button, my light-skinned brother from another mother, has a question. How does one who is Black communicate what you're talking about, Lawrence, to the older generation, and most specifically, our older gatekeepers who have become complacent in the status quo concerning Black voting habits and beliefs?
That's why I brought up George Clyburn, because some people feel defensive, and some people think he's right. And so I'm going to interrogate what he said. I'm going to take it seriously. And if it was right, if it had merit, I would have told you that. And so I'm not engaging from the perspective of, forget him, he an old fuddy-duddy. I want to actually interrogate the reality and actually present those folks facts to counterbalance what they're presenting. Because what I think Clyburn is feeling is a fear of what he felt happened in the 60s. That's what he said. He said we lost the movement because of that phrase. The phrase was "burn, baby, burn." The protests in LA in '65, the Watts riots, the King riots, they felt that the phrase "burn, baby, burn" was the celebration of violence that turned people off from the movement. And he literally said that cost us the movement. That might be his feeling, his frustration, his sadness and fear because of the trauma of the 60s. I think an objective analysis, even though I wasn't there, would say that COINTELPRO had a lot to do with that, but also the co-option of a lot of our radicals into the nonprofit industrial complex. So when you talk about how the moment in the momentum of the 60s was lost, part of it was pure backlash, but a lot of it was the tracking by the Ford Foundation, and read Top Down by Karen Ferguson. Read what I've written on newtimbuktu.com or on Search of Black Power, the podcast talks all about this. The radical grassroots infrastructure that allowed for political strength to be vested in working class Black people, to the extent that it was built in the 60s, was dismantled in the 70s. And that wasn't all backlash. That was the matriculation of a lot of those people into a gatekeeper class. So that's why the Democratic Party gives money to Mothership and doesn't give money to people like Stacey Abrams. Because if you ever watch Lawrence of Arabia, what did they say about the Arabs? We can't give them artillery because we make them independent and they can use it on us. They can't give radical grassroots Black and brown people the money to do their own get out the vote campaign, because then they can use it to push their own candidates. They're not accountable to the corporate Democratic Party. And I think that a lot of our elders are living in a world where they survived the only way they could. And they truly believe that that was the only way Black people can survive. And the reality is that we need to show them that they made the choices they make, and people can make different choices. And those choices lead to different paths in terms of possibilities for what can be possible. And I think that the choice of survival is totally understandable, but we need to also have people making a choice to invest in the possibility of a more expansive vision of Black and brown grassroots people thriving on their own, not just surviving in the white people's world. You need both. And that's one thing we've always said. It's not about you a sellout, you less real. You need to have people in both of those roles. We've just radically shifted all the way towards one end of the spectrum, because you got to get on the inside. You got to say, never say socialism, never say defund the police. And that has made it so we have no infrastructure to do the other one, which is be independent, be radical. And because we have no infrastructure for it, why are we surprised that it doesn't work? You have to build the infrastructure to support it, to prove that it can work. That infrastructure has been systemically dismantled by the prison industrial complex, by the New Jim Crow, and by a lot of our Black and brown gatekeepers, possibly with their own good intentions, saying, that's too dangerous, you're going to mess this up, you got to do it this way. So we have to build the infrastructure to prove these alternative theories, even if it's just in terms of having cross pressure. So this is the idea that these two things are just like mutually exclusive. In reality, they feed each other, because people at the radical left wing create more space for people on the inside to be more radical, to be more common sense, to do more minority contracting, which we can't even do at the federal government level anymore. So even something relatively moderate like minority contracting has been taken off the table And you need like a radical pressure, something like defund the police, to say, oh, wow, I'm not defunding the police, but I got to do something because these people are riled up. How about just minority contracting? And so then it's on the people on the left to not call that, forget that, that's weak, that's a concession, that's so whack. It's like, yeah, we get that you did that, but we want something different. So y'all go ahead and do that. That's cool. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. So the assumption is that everybody to the left is like, we just all hate the people at the center. Some people feel that way. I don't feel that way. I understand that Black people are struggling and they survive the way they survive. So I won't project my assumptions onto you, Clyburn, or other establishment Black leader. Don't project your assumptions onto me. Listen to what I'm actually saying and understand the theory, the science, the facts, the data, and the politics behind what I'm saying. Just because you're not used to it doesn't mean it's inherently wrong. It doesn't mean we can't find a way to work together productively.
Dope. So we're gonna have a couple more questions because Lawrence been out here giving y'all some gems, boy. If you figured out our favorite words at LBS: institutions, infrastructure, systemic. These are things that are important as we're talking about making transformative change in our community, especially at the election. So 2 more questions. We got one from Richard White. Do you think that the Bernie left policies are more in line with Democratic center policies than for poor Black policies?
That's a really good question. It depends on the policy. It really depends on the policy, because one of the things that I think that the Bernie left has been good at is focusing on the resource distribution component of it. So, wealth tax, universal basic income, job guarantees. Where they have not been good is understanding that Black and brown people need their own independent infrastructure to implement any of those policies on our own terms for ourselves. So I think that the Bernie left can be amenable to what my vision of sort of Black and brown community autonomy and thriving, but they need to understand that we have to control our own infrastructure for how we implement these universal policies. We can support the universal demand for healthcare for all, but darn sure better believe that it's the Black community that should be training their own doctors to be using the indigenous cultural practices of the community, because you can have Medicare for all pass and then they send in a bunch of racist doctors that we have to go to because there's no one else to go to because it's universal healthcare. And it's not just annoying to be with a racist doctor. They can over-medicate you. They can under-medicate you. They can give you an unnecessary surgery that has serious side effects. Black women get more hysterectomies than white women because there's this assumption of like essentially Black female hypersexuality, that if I give them a hysterectomy, they can't have no kids, which is good for them because they're hypersexual. There's more Black women who get C-sections, and which are like really, really painful and unnecessary because the assumption is Black women don't feel pain. So sometimes too much healthcare can be our problem, not a solution. And so just giving people healthcare is not my vision of Black liberation. My vision of Black liberation is us controlling the ecosystem of how that healthcare is provided, focusing on preventative care, focusing on like good diets, like healthy soul food. The Bernie people don't know nothing about that. That's not a knock on them. It's not their job to know nothing about that. It's our job to know about that and to push on them that that's the vision of implementation that we want to see for our version of universal healthcare. And that is our condition to support whatever you're talking about. So it's not F you off the rip, and it's not, I'm gonna do whatever you say, but please, please, please think about me, please. It's, look, this is what I want. I have the research, I have the vision. This is my condition of support for Medicare for all. And you keep talking about how woke you are, how much you care about Black people. You should just agree to those conditions. We got to have politicians willing to carry it that way and willing to stand up to not just the corporate Democrats, but also the Bernie folks who say you're fracturing the left, you're fracturing the movement. Why do you have these radical specific demands? We need it to look the same all over the country so people don't think we're giving extra free stuff to Black folks. It's like, I'm not asking for extra free stuff. I'm asking for my own version of whatever you're giving to other people. If white people in Harlan County in Kentucky, if they just want to be able to get, free detox, or, if they just want free versions of the existing healthcare system, that works for them, that's great. A more accessible version of the current healthcare system is not a solution for Black people, because the current healthcare system is not just embedded with racial bias. The fundamental praxis of healthcare it's based upon assumptions that do not reflect our community, do not reflect the communal practice of our community. They don't reflect the need to have like more community-based healthcare, like not just like clinics, but like actual people going to churches, actual people going to like barbershops and like nail salons doing healthcare on the ground. That's just not what healthcare in the American system is built to do. But that's what we need. So we have to build a version of that healthcare that reflects our community needs, which should be the condition of our support for anything, whether it's from Bernie or from Biden, or from Beto, or from Bush or Trump.
Man, you was preaching, man. I mean, these comments is on fire. Yo. You was, yeah, all that. So we're gonna wrap it up real quick with of course, the most appropriate person to cap us out is our good sister Nadira Smith. And let me see. Hold on. So, any local Baltimore election analysis as it relates to your research and data, Lawrence?
Nope, not yet. The elections in Baltimore tend not to be competitive. I think every ballot initiative passed, every Democrat won. The only thing that was competitive was the Green running in Stokes' district. I believe that was 11 city council. Stokes won. Now the Green running in Stokes' district, Pax Mueller ran a very competitive campaign, got thousands of votes. People just assume because the Democrats on the ballot, Black folks instinctively are always going to vote D no matter what. I think that is not true. I think that was a very well-run, very spirited campaign. I think that shows you that there's a real hunger for progressive alternatives to the status quo. Now, I think that there's a conversation to be had about whether, like I said, we can't just copy and paste the Bernie campaign onto a city council candidate, because whatever things they talk about have to reflect the local institutional conditions on the ground and actually be plugged into the existing institutions, not just demonize them because they have a relationship to Stokes. Of course they have a relationship to Stokes. He's city councilman. And so you want to be sure, if you're agreeing, that you're working with these indigenous Black institutions, not just assuming that they're just reformist and corporate shills because they have a relationship to people in power. So I think if we have that conversation between, I think, the increasingly multicultural left and some of the established Black folks who, again, may be working with institutional Democratic Party interests, but have their own political game that they try to play to get their own concessions and push back against that corporate consensus of the Democratic Party. It's important to keep those lines of dialogue open so that when you're organizing beyond the election, we can actually have a good dialogue as to what we can do provisionally that really pushes these centrist corporate Democrats like Stokes. That's what Stokes is, but he won. So we have to continue to build a strategy that holds these folks accountable and pushes them at every single level towards policies that are more progressive. I mean, you got Stokes' district, Old Town is in that district, the public housing projects are in that district, and they're up for redevelopment. And there's just huge possibilities for more broad-based, community-centered investment. But you have to challenge the developers if you want to do that. And that's something you have to hold Stokes accountable to, not just on the election year, but all the time, because last thing we want is for them to get a 4-year head start on wiping out more poor working class people from East Baltimore, and thus having to circle back 4 years from now after a lot of damage has been done. So again, I think there's a lot of good work happening with this political energy. Like Stacey Abrams said, I'm not going to win every time. I will not promise victory. But if we invest in the infrastructure, we can make the infrastructure work beyond the election cycle. And I think that's really the challenge that we're having to build at a local level, is beyond these every 2 years or 4 years. What can we do every day that actually puts pressure on that system? So again, it's like anybody who is feels the political energy. Again, Annapolis is happening in January. They're going to try to do the austerity thing because of COVID. We have to stop them. So we have to take that energy that we put towards stopping Trump to stop anyone, Democrat or Republican, who tries to implement those sort of ridiculous austerity, corporatist policies in Maryland, whether it be, giving the cannabis industry just to Black and or white millionaires, or taking the tax money from cannabis and plugging it into the general fund. That would be a travesty in my mind. And we need to have that political sophistication to take that energy we put into campaigns and put it into advocacy to really shift the money and power around so we can deliver a material victory. Because if we start delivering material victories to people on like cannabis, war on drug separations, they're going to vote for you. when it comes time 4 years from now. And those are the type of things that people remember and people see, that I think we have it the other way. So many people have it the other way around, which is like, I win the election and then I can do that type of stuff. But if they see you pushing for that type of stuff before the election, even if you don't quite get everything, they see that you're not just showing up every 4 years. Now, I know the Green Party's worked very hard to not do that in locally, but they see that you're not just showing up when you want to vote. You're working for them consistently, and that builds a level of credibility and a base that you can get real material concessions out of the political system and set you up for potential electoral challenges in the future. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think we have a lot of energy that if it were just strategically presented, we could get even more concessions and deliver materially even better for working class Black and brown people and poor white people. And I think I hope that people can take that same energy to Annapolis or any other issue that can really move material resources to the ground.
Dope. Appreciate you, Lawrence. Digital hand clap for my man, Lawrence Grand Prix. Appreciate you for being on tonight, Lawrence. Thank you for the folks that have been on the live stream with all your dope questions and input on tonight's discussion. Matter of fact, Lawrence, I'm going to let you go, but appreciate you, brother. Matter of fact, before you go, though, for people who want to reach out to you about this presentation, because I saw quite a few people that said they were interested in getting more information about some of the stats you brought up, some of the research you brought up. How can people get in contact with you and see further about this if they're interested?
Yep. So email is Lawrence, LAWRENCE at lbsbaltimore.com. So we obviously have this recorded, so I think we should have this potentially on YouTube sometime soon. And also, if you just go to our Facebook page, our Facebook Lives, I believe will be saved there. But we also have a podcast, In Search of Black Power. We've been doing it for a couple years now. We have a lot of really, really dope content, a lot of real long form, in-depth analysis on a bunch of issues. And I think I'm going to turn this talk into a podcast. So it should be on that stream, which is In Search of Black Power on anywhere you find podcasts. But also check out our website, newtonbuck2.com. So in addition to obviously lbsbaltimore.com, we have a separate page for some of our in-depth writing, our podcast, and some of our other analysis. So you can find our thoughts on, like I said, some of the things I mentioned about the Ford Foundation co-opting Black Power in the 60s and 70s. We have reviews of books that talk about those different things. And finally, I'm not on Twitter a lot because I like the relative pieces of sanity that I still have. But I am on Twitter at Neo Nubian. That's NE0, Nubian, Nubian. And so at Neo Nubian, you can find me there. And so, yeah, I talk about these issues a little bit, and I may do, I might end up kind of doing like a mega Twitter thread, kind of consolidating some of these charts and data. So that might be a way to kind of get the snippets of the analysis in a form, but that may take a while for me to put together. So I'll hopefully do that. And, obviously there's a lot more coming in terms of different research analysis that we all do.
Dope. Well, appreciate you, Lawrence. I'm gonna let you go tonight, but you stay safe, stay healthy out here.
Absolutely. Appreciate you. See you soon.
Yes, sir. So let me get my man Lawrence out of here. Okay. So you saw the dopeness. First off, I tried to tell you Lawrence did not come to play with you, okay? Because you're gonna have to turn off the stream and rewatch it because he didn't come to play. Okay, you need to take the notes, take it and apply it. Okay, 4 minutes. You saw the presentation. Get it together. Okay, first off. But secondly, we have people all over here. First off, thank you so much for being on the stream tonight to talk about the election. Again, if you are unfamiliar, if this is your first experience with League of a Beautiful Struggle, let me tell you, we're a grassroots political organization located here in Baltimore City. We do grassroots activism and political activism on the local and state level for policies and legislation that directly benefit Black people in Baltimore. And so while a lot of people have like real broad statements and real broad understanding of political activism, we're very specific. We focus on policy. So legislation and law, it's the most unsexy version of activism. It's lots of research, lots of reading, and lots of application of theory theory to the practice of political activism. And so that's what we do. And we do that every day. And it's not sexy work, but it's the necessary work, one of the pieces of the necessary work to accomplish our goal of Black liberation and freedom. We are explicitly Black, explicitly Pan-African. And so all of our resources, the majority of our resources come from people like you every day who want to contribute to the liberation of our people in our community and who want to actually get work done. That's part of the problem a lot of times, is that people talk about stuff like the election, talk about political activism, but when it comes time to actually get the work done, people just want to stick to the conversation. So what you saw tonight is not just conversation as far as we're concerned. We're going to take all this knowledge and all this research that we have at our disposal and directly apply it to the work that we're doing here in Baltimore. And hopefully people from around the country, if you're not in Baltimore, you're watching this in another place, and you're like, you know what, I want to apply some of that to where I come from, then absolutely. You should take whatever useful to you and apply it to where you're at. Now, before I get off of here, I got to give a shout out to the sustainers. First off, I saw you, Mr. Wernsdorfer. You creeped on the live. I seen you. Wait a minute, where you at? Mr. Wernsdorfer is a 2-year supporter of LBS, and we deeply appreciate your contributions. There you go. 2 years of being an LBS supporter, LBS sustainer. Appreciate you, my good man. And we have I think 10 people that signed up tonight to be a sustainer. Y'all made me feel like I'm on a telethon or something, son. Okay, we have to give a shout out to our recently signed up sustainers tonight. Yeah, I mean, it's real, people. I'm trying to tell you. Ganesha Martin, I already said a shout out to you, but appreciate you. Wayne, Nick Brady, appreciate you, brother. Miss Donna, I seen you on the live. You signed up like you said you was going to. Appreciate you, Miss Donna. Miss Denise Duval, thank you for being a sustainer. Mr. George Button, my light-skinned brother from another mother, thank you. Naughty Groves, thank you so much. These are new sustainers, people that signed up to be a sustainer tonight. These are people who directly want to invest in grassroots political organizing and activism in Baltimore. And you see people come on here that are doing all kinds of work, okay? And we just chose to talk about this because a lot of us were frustrated with what was happening in the national conversation about electoral politics, and we wanted to do something different and we want to have a different conversation. So Lawrence came, you seen what he came with you with. I'm trying to tell you, you're going to have to turn this off. When you turn this off, you have to go to YouTube. It's on YouTube too. It's not just on Facebook. So you have to go to YouTube, put some timestamps, okay, at 30 minutes, 35 seconds. That's what he said, okay? You got to take those notes. You got to apply it to your everyday work, all right? Let me get up out of here. I mean, I already kept you on for almost 2 hours clean. But again, LBS, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. If you want to support LBS, go to lbsbaltimore.com/sustain. And if you want to volunteer, it's lbsbaltimore.com/build. If you want to make a one-time donation, you can't do a sustainer, but you want to make a one-time donation, lbsbaltimore.com/donate. All right. And again, when you become a sustainer, it's like whatever you pay for Netflix and Hulu, it's less than that. We're talking about $10 to $15 per month, and it directly supports advocacy work happening in the city of Baltimore. So I strongly encourage you to sign up. And if you can't do any of those things, you tuning in and supporting us this way, also acceptable, because we know the pandemic has really caused a lot of havoc in our community. We want to make sure that we can get this information directly to y'all. All right. So appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Stay Black. Stay dope. If you ain't Black, you feel me? Stay dope in general. But if you Black, people stay awesome. All right. You be safe. The pandemic is wilding, but you need to make sure you stay safe out in these streets. Have an awesome holiday. And matter of fact, on December the 19th is our Black Legislative Agenda Day. Okay, so if you loved everything you heard here tonight and you want to make sure that you can apply it, local activism in Baltimore and in Maryland, I strongly encourage you digitally show up to the Black Legislative Agenda Day on December 19th. You can find all that information out on our website, lbsbaltimore.com. All right, y'all, stay Black, stay dope. Peace.